Superintendent Debbie Critchfield. How are you?
I'm so good.
I'm so good. I love it when people come in at the end of the session. Here we are.
Is that where we are?
It's March 21st.
Yeah, we're close.
We are really
I hear.
close.
That's what I hear.
Yeah. Somebody was saying that they thought it was only 2 more weeks. I'm like, I think it's at least 3. What do I know? Because this is like my first time at the rodeo.
2 feels about right. I think folks are hoping that they wrap up business and yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, outside of Idaho, there are forces that do in fact affect us because we are part of a nation.
We are.
You
learned your government.
I've done good. The Federal Department of Education. Now, it has not been officially disbanded, but our President Trump is saying that he very much wants to, and he's been making noise about this for some time. Yes. Obviously, this is going to take an act larger than an executive order. But what would that do to Idaho? What does it do to the different titles that go along with the Federal Department of Education? What does it do to our special ed? What does it do to our lunch programs? There are all kinds of programs that were aggregated at the inception of the Federal Department of Education that were being addressed, that affected school children, but they were being addressed by different departments within the federal government. And the Department of Education brought all of those under one umbrella and other things, obviously, layered on all kinds of requirements and regulations, and especially those tied to funding. If the Federal Department of Education goes away, talk to me about the immediate effects on Idaho education.
Okay, there's a lot of layers in there.
Take your time.
Well, and I think the first place I would start is a comment that you made about bringing all of those functions in under the Department of Education, and then the effort to then deconsolidate that and put it in places where it makes sense. So I think understanding what the executive order does and then what it is signaling is very important. So on the first paragraph of the second section of the executive order that was signed by the president, it explicitly says that this is not to indicate that there will be an interruption of programs, services, or benefits. So I think that's very important to say, that I have not seen, nor have I been told, that we're going to change the services that go to students. What the change is about is an administrative reorganization and removing the bureaucracy. And I'm all in for that. So when we go through the process of identifying a student who could and should receive special education services, you can not imagine the amount of paperwork, maybe you can, that's involved in doing that, to the point that if you talk to any teacher that's involved in special education at any level, a great portion of their time, and a lot of this goes after school or takes place after school or on the weekends, is dedicated to filling out the paperwork instead of focusing on how to help that child be successful with their needs for academics. So looking at this whole environment of less bureaucracy, more control of the state, I have a hard time understanding how someone could argue that point. Now, built into these layers that we're talking about are questions that come to me. Well, does that mean that states will no longer have to provide special education services? Those are congressional acts. So
okay. So this is above the executive order.
Yeah. So those types of changes they require, now if there is an idea or a desire to change those, that has to take more than an executive order to do that. Now, what I'm specifically talking about is it's called IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That's a congressional act. So if we're going to change that or do something different in the state, then Congress has to come in and say, you are no longer beholden to that. What I am hearing, and several weeks ago, I met face-to-face with our Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon. I asked her this, what do you see this looking like? And she said, states control the money for education, less bureaucracy on the federal side. So to this point, even with the executive order, or in addition to the executive order, everything I've seen has been about how to organize delivering the services in a more streamlined, efficient way so that states are less beholden to the bureaucracy that has been layered on year after year after year. So we have 10 titles that go into education.
Sure.
And going in and changing those will take more effort. And so when parents say, oh, this is signed and they're doing away with the Department of Ed, your child's still getting those services. Those dollars have been, I think it's been reiterated in writing and in interviews that those dollars are still going to come to us. What I love is that now states can prioritize, in addition to the federal acts that we have that are required, we have ways to say, here are the priorities in Idaho, and here's where we want those dollars to go. I know that's a lot.
No. I
kind of parsing out what does this mean, it takes a minute.
So bottom line is they're saying, look, we're going to stop looking over your shoulder. We're still going to provide you with the resources we were providing previously, but you're going to get to deal with them in whatever manner you want. And it does not let the state off the hook for things like special education, because special education was not...
Unless Congress changes that.
Right. So this particular act or whatever is going on right now, unless Congress steps up and takes specific action to dismantle the obligations that it put in place.
Special education, right.
Great. So if somebody's getting, for instance, speech therapy, and that's considered special education, the resources will still be there for speech therapy. That student will still continue to receive those things until which time something else happens. That hasn't happened yet.
So this is where I'm going to say something that I'm going to give a disclaimer, because I don't want to sound heartless or insensitive to the fact that people have lost jobs. I am sorry. I mean, that's my disclaimer, that I feel bad for anyone that has to change employment, the economy, the times, these are hard things. With that said, the main actions around the Department of Education and this dismantling was to remove those layers of people that are looking through compliance documents. A number of those individuals were hired during COVID to address specific COVID needs. Well, COVID's gone now. And so the government, as we know, and we do this at the state level too, we have a tendency of adding on without going back and saying, hey, wait a minute, do we still need all those people to shuffle all those papers? And so that sort of takes the headlines. Oh, they're shutting the doors on the Department of Education. Well, they're reorganizing the administrative function of that office. Here's an example of something that is not handled through the U.S. Department of Education, that is in our everyday life and is not going to change. School lunch, handled through the USDA. All of those dollars come to schools and charters through the Department of Ag. Now, someone may say, why is it over there? I don't know. I'm sure there's a history as to why it's there, probably because of the food and some of that. So that function has never been a part of the U.S. Department of Education. So I use that and share that as an example to say there are opportunities for us within these titles and within the services that are being provided to kids in classrooms around the state to divide that into other places and have that as an administrative function of other departments without the services going away. It just won't be under the title of that. Now, I would expect and anticipate that that Secretary McMahon has some other ideas of how to do that. But initially, all of the communication that we have had has repeatedly emphasized you are to still provide the services. The monies for those services are coming. And the way that things are authorized in Congress, we still have dollars for the current school session or the school year right now. So no one has called me up and said, hey, start holding back that money or don't send them out the money. So I don't want to make it sound like nothing will change because, so this is just a name only. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is changes for kids, for families, particularly parents that are concerned. We haven't seen any information to say that they're going to back off of us serving the special needs of our kids.
Gotcha. And again, one of the large considerations around the school choice argument in the state was really that, our public education has so many layers. Like I got a stack of spreadsheets this thick that were all of these different regulations, both state and federal. And at some point, I think it was Senator Lent had proposed a bill that was like, listen, maybe we start integrating school choice, but we also start stripping away the regulations and stop holding schools to this almost near impossible reporting and recording requirement, things of that nature.
I agree. And I think because of the work and now a new law going into effect around choice and paying for choice, we look at that and using that similar example of layering on over time and not going back and looking at, well, what regulations don't make sense anymore? Let's take those off. We're not good at that part. Well, let's go through that door. And I've had a number of legislators ask me if I'll sit down with them over the summer and open up the rule book and say, what are all of the rules? What are our expectations now? And things change over time. Things that have been on the books for a long time, that are reports that need to be turned in. Turning in a report for the sake of turning in a report does nothing for accountability. It doesn't drive our achievement. All it does is say, well, I checked a box and I said you had to turn that in. Those are the types of things that I think that we can take off of the plate of our districts and our charters. And then it gives us time to get in there and say, what do we need to drive towards achievement? What does real accountability look like? Because if we're saying it's compliance, we're missing the boat.
Right. Obligatory versus efficacy. It's like, let's get away from that.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you about the nature of choice and the impact you think it will have on the state. But before we go, just one more thing on the Federal Department of Ed. The title system became, at least in my lifetime as an adult, became a marionette style program, which at least it appeared to be that way, in that institutions and departments and schools and universities started taking funding that was provided to them. And then later on, once they had established a real firm dependency on that funding, the rules around that funding changed. So they got the hooks in, and after like 20 or 30 years, you've depended on this money, or, you have your whole system set up around it. And then it's like, okay, if you still want this $10 that you now can't function without, you're going to have to do this other thing. And of course, to stay in compliance and get the money, people start saying, okay, well, like, we can do this. And that became this real marionette style, non-direct control of a lot of our education systems. Do you see stripping away those things, or at least removing some of those things, as being a benefit or a hindrance to our education program?
I think a benefit, and I think you raise another important aspect of changes at the federal level, that no longer are these title programs and these dollars that are specific, for specific needs, right, are they going to have strings attached to go through a non-legislative approach, right, for social issues? So I'll give you there's lots of examples, but I think some of the most pertinent ones are related to, again, social issues around, hey, if you're going to take these dollars, then you as a local board, you've got to change your policies to match what the federal government thinks that you should do. So I first really keyed in or tuned in on this towards the end of President Obama and my work at my local school district, and also being a member of the State Board of Education. I started paying attention to that, the places where this guidance came. Well, for most school leaders, we were reading guidance. It was kind of a tricky way to not say, it wasn't a lie in saying this is the law and what you have to do, but here was federal guidance.
Quote, guidance.
And school people are generally rule followers. You say, here are the rules, they're going to follow the rules. I shouldn't say generally. They do follow the rules. That's just how educators are. Show me the finish line. Give me the rules. Let me go. Here, we're going to do it. And same with our administrators. So it had all the trappings of looking like, oh, I guess we've got to do this. So there was a lot of communication even back then saying, know and understand guidance versus law. That is very different. Well, then we got a new president, and those things were taken off. And then President Biden came in, and we saw even more influence of social issues, particularly around gender issues. Now, I know that, some people, those are sensitive topics like, hey, do you not care about kids? I absolutely care about kids. But when we're talking about locally elected school board members, the federal government in Washington, D.C., they shouldn't be telling a local board, hey, if you're going to get these federal dollars, then all of your policies need to match what our president thinks that they should look like. And so I expect that is going to back off. So when we talk about returning more control and power to states, I absolutely think that that's what we're talking about here. I sure hope so.
Yes, former Representative Julie Yamamoto, actually, in one of my last interviews with her when she was still a representative, she was articulating the problem that she saw coming down the pipe. This was, I think this was March 24. And she was saying, look, it appears that, then President Biden was adding to Title IX regulations with regard to, women's sports and things like this. And she was like, this is going to be a gigantic fight in Idaho. Like, obviously, we had our governor come out and take a very hard stance on this. And now it appears that Title IX funding is going to be tied to this federal regulation that is in absolute conflict with what Idaho is in right now. So, again, removing that layer, and this is kind of what I'm hearing you say is this is kind of the nature of when they say we're going to return the power to the states. Right. It's, hey, we're no longer going to have this marionette system where we have our hooks in you with funding, and then you have to follow our, non-elected bureaucratic mechanisms of changing your in-state behavior.
Right. A way to work around Congress, a way to work around state legislatures and executive branches, and have one person say, oh, look, I figured out a door, a little loophole. I can go through and say, hey, you're not going to get that money unless your policies look like our policies. So
then our policies are no longer reflective of our elected school board members. They're reflective of whoever's in DC.
Absolutely.
And now we're going to be able to come back and say, no. Our school board members are standing behind these things, not because they're required to stay solvent, but they're just doing it because this is what they believe is right.
Well, and I think that the conversation around policies, who's responsible for what, who's accountable to who. Ultimately, I believe that the local district is accountable to their patrons. So the role of the state is to provide the resources directed towards the priorities that we have around student achievement for reading, for math. I talk a lot about getting back to basics. Then the local district says, how are we going to use the dollars that we've had for the community and the kids that we've got and implement our policies to drive towards that achievement. A lot of times I get asked to weigh in on, a local district policy. And I don't do that because we say, well, so long as it's not contrary to the law, the local district gets to decide how they want to utilize those resources and set the tone of their district. And that's important because they are elected.
Right. Let's move on, if you don't mind, to school choice. Now, school choice has been one of those things. I even believe there was President Trump was talking directly to Governor Little at a press thing where he was talking about how great education was going to be in Idaho. Now, again, education has been doing very well in Idaho, contrary to what a lot of people would like you to believe. But our NAEP scores are doing very, very well. Yes. Like we're improving across.
8% growth in reading for third graders in the last 2 years.
What percent was it?
8%. That's fantastic.
In how long?
In 2 years for third graders.
And that's like proficiency levels?
Yes.
Wow, man, that's fantastic.
And just as a side note, because I'm always waving my flag about phonics, but it is that focus. For 2 years we've been talking about phonics, and we're seeing the results of that.
Man, that's such a good point.
I distracted you in a good way.
No. These systems takes time to implement, right? Like if you have a test in third grade and you start with kindergartners, you're going to have to wait through kindergarten
That's
first,
what we're
second,
at, yep.
and then half of third grade to get those results. And it's like, can you just let the system work for a second?
Absolutely.
But lest we get accused of saying good things about education, hang on now. People have
always
said,
be accused.
People come after me like I'm a terrible person. Check this out. I had sorry to digress, but I had Speaker Moyle in here, and we were talking about education, and I brought them NAEP results and made a small clip and put that out onto the social webs. Literally direct stats from the NAEP, and I guess the mayor of Mountain Home brought that up in like a state of the city, talking about like, hey, our education system isn't so terrible. And I got hate mail from people mad that I was saying good things about the education system. Like, what a wild world we live in.
Well, listen, if public education isn't working, then the solution I have for you is looking for a problem. And so I think there's a bit of that, right. And not just in Idaho, but nationally. Yes. And I think it goes into this choice, kind of bringing us, back there. We've never, starting with me, we've never spoken against choice. I will always defend and protect a parent's right to make their choice. when we start talking about paying choice, which we have that, and we're not going to, replow the field on that. But I think some people have thought, well, I have to keep tearing down public education because if I don't tear down public ed, then people aren't going to want to support choice. And I've said that's the wrong argument. Public education can be doing an incredible job. Now, if it's not the right place for your kid, go somewhere else. So I have asked people who've talked about this. Well, we've got to have choice because we're failing our kids. Please stop talking about it like that. You can say we want to celebrate and honor choice because parents should make choices. That in itself is its own argument. You don't have to tear down public education in the process. And to your point, we're doing a pretty good job.
Well, if I may ask, don't you think that they actually do? Like if you're offering a value proposition, you have to be offering value. And if you're like, hey, I got this product, it's 80%, whatever the product is, right? And you're like, by the way, the alternative, what you have right now, it's 85%. Nobody's going to be like, oh, I'll take an 80% solution when we already have 85. What you have to say is I have an 80% right here. And by the way, the alternative is like 50%. And you're like, oh my God. So you have to have a delta there on quality. And in the absence of saying like an abject, that this system is an abject failure, you can't even say it's moderately working. Because if you say it's moderately working, then people are like, okay, well, if we got some things right. Okay, so like, what do we need to fix? Can you just point out like the 4 things that we need to fix and we'll go after those things? You have to say like complete, unequivocal failure, non-redemptive capacity, like all of these things. Like that's why a lot of people came at it.
I get it. And if we were talking about widgets and we were in business in a factory making things, that would absolutely be an apples to apples. We're talking about kids who come in at different levels with different experiences, different abilities. And in the public system, we are testing everyone, we're working with everyone. And so I think that there is that unfair comparison of we want everyone. We're going to take everyone. Not only is that legally required, but I think it's also ethically and morally right to say, hey, if you show up at the doors of our schools and our charters, we're gonna help you learn and help you to be a good person. And so in this choice argument, this is why I know they use a comparison, but why I don't like it is I think it actually takes away from why we're supporting choice. You can say that we want parents to be able to make the choices that we want. Fantastic. Don't tear down someone else's choice that decided to go to public school because you want to do something else over there. I mean, when we get into this war about what's better in that sense, what's better looks different for you than it does for me. And so I don't like the tearing down of public education because we are going to support someone else's choice. Well, how about we just all say there's choices, we've made decisions that we're going to help pay for that. Let's try to make the system that we have effective.
Listen, I very much appreciate that, obviously. And I actually differ with you on one point. I don't think that people are here talking about kids. I think they're here talking about politics and profit. Because lest we forget, the vast majority of private schools are for-profit mechanisms, and they are going to market themselves and draw on as many clients as humanly possible. And if they can expand, they will expand. And if they contract, they'll fix something so they don't contract. I mean, and again, not to say anybody arguing for choice has nefarious, like I understand deeply in my personal life and my family. Like when I was in the former state that shall not be named, my children were already outside of the public school. They were going to a private Catholic school.
And you did what worked for you.
We did what worked for us. And then coming here, we have a different breakdown of education. So like, I'm not against that. And you have choices here. No, I get it. And I don't actually think that I know we're not like disagreeing in the, like, we disagree. Yeah, I don't think so at all.
I think you're actually emphasizing my point, which is, when you're talking about a business product versus really we're talking about kids, that's where that comparison is not a fair one.
Sure. Okay, so be that as it may, all of that sits there. School choice will obviously not be a cure-all for everything. Like if our end goal is the most educated Idaho populace, school choice is not the only solution, nor is it a conclusive solution, even if we wanted it to be.
It's not the magic or the silver bullet of, I feel like sometimes people use it that it's supposed to be the conversation ender. the mic drop of education. Well, our kids are going to be able to read better. School choice. Our kids are going to do better in PE. School choice. I mean, it feels like we get way out there. Is choice a part of the overall educational biosphere? Absolutely. We also see kids who have left public school that went to different choices and come back because they're like, yeah, in the end, we think this is probably the better choice. What I'd like to focus on is the resources that we put into public education. Are they aligned with our priorities? Can our kids read? If they can't, what are we doing about it? And if they can, what are we doing to make sure that they're going to still grow and get better? Because we're always going to need to be achieving. And so there's things that we can do within the public system that don't have to be competitive with choice. We want all kids to be able to read. We want all kids to be able to function and take care of themselves, because eventually they're going to be our neighbors, they're our taxpayers, they're all the people that are going to be doing the jobs that we're going to have. They're the podcasters, they're the state superintendent. No one dreams when they're little. They're not like, when I'm big, I'm going to be the state superintendent. But thank heavens there are people who care about that.
Yeah, well, no kidding. And again, going back to our original conversation, the resources we put in should reflect our values. And I think there's a lot to be said, and it's very complex, the idea that we're dismantling the federal Department of Ed to some degree. But man, I think that gives us far more of an opportunity to have our education systems reflecting our values. I
think so. And I think that also creates some challenges right now at the state level. And this is what I mean by that. So right now with the federal dollars coming in, they're very prescribed. Here's what the money is for, even though they don't send us enough. And here's how you have to use it. There's no argument about that, other than we just say lots of rules, not enough money. When we start talking about state resources, that's where you have 105 people at the legislature who have very clear ideas on what education should look like, what we should be paying for. I'm hopeful as we look at federal dollars coming into the state that we'll be able to focus in on what the priorities should be, so that we're not also quibbling about what the federal dollars should be used for too. Again, I just keep saying it over and over about getting back to basics. What are those fundamental learning blocks that we want our kids to be able to know and be able to do? And then we get into the junior high school range. I want our high school experience to be a relevant experience so that our kids leave not with a piece of paper that says I was really good at sitting at a desk for 13 years, but I feel good enough that I can go pursue, whatever I want to do. That type of excitement around what can be makes me really happy, but it will come with some challenges that I think there's going to be more dollars that we may not agree on where they should go.
To that point, one more note. When you talk about relevance, this is such an important piece. I've been talking to people about, I interviewed at least a dozen people all about education this legislative session, and
I know you've been burning it up. Do you sleep?
I try not to. I have done. I clocked it. It's something like 150 episodes in the last 75 days. So it's been roughly 15 episodes per week, which has been unbelievable. It's the best education I've ever gotten on the happenings of Idaho. But the relevance and the problem that people find themselves in is there was a failure, at least in some point, to articulate, because people will be like, what do we even have public education for? It's like, well, we're failing to articulate sufficiently the relevance of the education system. And again, coming back to things like what I spoke with Reed Stephan about and digital literacy, and having that conversation with him was bonkers, because he actually, which doesn't happen too often, like he totally caught me off guard with his position on it. And for instance, we were talking about the creation of different avenues and careers, one being an AI prompt generator or prompt engineer, because utilizing these tools, it's like, look, I have a hammer, right? And by the way, you can do incredible things with this hammer. People just aren't really skilled with the hammer. So let's make a training program that makes you incredibly skilled with a hammer. So you can frame out a house, set a nail, drive it one hit, and you become this wizard with this hammer. Well, if you push that into a larger, more complex system, you have the AI systems. They're like, look, this is the most complex hammer ever. You just have to know how to wield it. And if you can wield it, you can do bonkers things, but that in itself becomes an avenue of study, which is prompt engineering, asking the right questions, tweaking the questions and the output, doing all all of these things till we get the most condensed, high efficiency answer possible. So one person in 10 minutes is doing the work of 3 people in an hour. Like it's that kind of stuff that we need to teach
Yes. So
kids
I'm going to
on.
add to that we talk a lot about helping our kids become critical thinkers. I would add to that critical consumers of information. So to your example, I can go on to ChatGPT and I can ask it a question. AI doesn't know if it gave me the right answer. It gave me an answer. It may not be the right answer. We are going to have in Idaho, we have 319,000 students. All of those students are going to come into the world, and they are digital natives, and we're giving them the tools, and we want to prepare them. And we can show them how to use the hammer. We can show them, how to take that information and drop it into something else. But if we don't help them know how to understand and filter through the information that they get, we're missing a huge part of what we do. Because again, technology doesn't know if it got it right.
Right. It just knows if it delivered an answer.
It delivered you an answer, but if you're not asking for the prompting, if you're not answering the right question, and somebody made a comment to me a couple weeks ago. I was at a forum. We were talking about what AI looks like in today's classroom. How do teachers use it? How do we help kids become good consumers? And the statement was made that cybersecurity begins at the individual level, and I think that you agree with that. I mean,
Yes.
You're at the front of the parade carrying the flag on that, and we're doing and trying and getting things out there. But that is an overall part of what we do in education now, or needs to be.
I very much agree with that. Talking about local control and local values, one last thing I wanted to chat about is we had the bathroom bill come out that was passed by the legislature and I believe signed by the governor, obviously, a few years back.
And immediately went into a lawsuit.
Yeah, it got hung up in court instantaneously. We have at least seemingly a resolution for the time being on that. Tell me about that.
Yes. So the lawsuit was titled Roe v. Critchfield. And so my name appears on many lawsuits. That suing the Department of Education or the state superintendent because part of my job through the Constitution is to implement the laws that are put forward. So I got a call yesterday. In fact, I don't know when this will air, but we'll say March 20th from our Attorney General personally saying, we won the case. They had pursued, they were defending the case at the Ninth Circuit Court. And so we're reading through what the judges have said. But the result of that will be that law will go into effect, that districts and charters will be able to set terms and policies around bathroom uses, overnight stays where there's boys and girls involved, locker rooms. We hear from parents all the time that we're not trying to take away the rights of any student. And when it comes to bathrooms and locker rooms, if there's a family bathroom that someone can use, if they're not sure if they want to go in the boy or the girl, but girls that know that they want to go into girls' bathrooms and boys that know that they want to go into boys' bathrooms, those can stay like that. And that if there are facilities available in schools and in locker rooms for others who aren't comfortable. And frankly, when you're in junior high, a lot of junior high kids just aren't comfortable at all changing and doing things in front of the same sex, let alone the opposite sex. And so I really see this as a protection for all kids.
Superintendent Critchfield, I really appreciate the time. I know today's a working day. You're running around, you fit this in. Is there anything you'd like to hit here at the end?
I don't even know what to say. I feel like we've covered a little bit of everything.
Yeah, we certainly have.
I just always like to end with some cheerleading about our public schools. We're doing a good job. Our teachers care about kids. Our families are supportive. I am blown away when I see the support, whether it's fundraising or just showing up to do things at schools from our parents and grandparents and business leaders. We're doing some incredible things that we're investing in now, and the fruits of those labors, we're going to be seeing them in the coming years, whether it's investing in vocational or career technical education, how we're helping kids get connected with their goals and their interests, reading, just so many things. I'm just really excited about where we are at this time in Idaho's educational place, and I just can't champion that enough.
Amen to that. Thank you for what you do for Idaho, and let's do this again.
Sounds good.